The morning sun rose slowly over the suburbs of Benton Falls, Michigan, casting long golden rays over quiet streets and frozen lawns. It was the kind of cold that made everything look clean, almost innocent, until you looked closer. Judge Daniel Reed had lived in Benton Falls for nearly 15 years. To most people, he was the picture of respectability, a 51-year-old federal judge, calm and deliberate, known for his deep baritone voice and his measured sense of justice. He wore his suits like armor and spoke with the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime trying to make the law work for everyone. But lately, Daniel had stopped believing that the law could fix everything. Because behind the marble walls of his courtroom, behind the rehearsed oaths and polite words, he had seen the rot spreading, a quiet, systemic bias that shaped who got second chances, and who didn't. It wasn't a secret. It was an open wound hidden under a bandage of bureaucracy. And Daniel Reed was tired of pretending not to see it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in January. A woman's voice, professional, clipped. "Judge Reed? This is Special Agent Lauren Hayes with the Bureau." Daniel leaned back in his chair. He had worked with federal agents before, wire fraud, organized crime, but this tone was different. "Agent Hayes," he said. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, sir," she replied, "it's what we can do together." A pause. "Together," he echoed. "Yes," she said. "We're conducting a covert investigation into racial bias and misconduct inside several local police departments across western Michigan. It's classified under Operation Silent Ground. We believe certain officers are targeting African American drivers along the I-96 and I-94 corridors. But the problem is deeper than we can prove. We need someone they won't suspect. Someone respected, untouchable." Her words hung in the air. Daniel knew exactly what she was asking, even before she said it. "You want me," he said quietly, "to be your witness." Hayes didn't hesitate. "We want you to help us expose them from the inside." That night, Daniel sat alone in his home office. The shelves behind him were lined with law books and family photos, his late wife Evelyn smiling in the summer sun, his son Marcus in graduation robes. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the furnace. He opened the Bureau's encrypted file on his laptop, case summaries, reports of routine traffic stops that had turned violent, complaint records that were quietly dismissed. He read names. Officer Mark Collins. Officer Jenna Holt. Sergeant Dennis Waller. Each name carried a pattern, every victim's profile nearly identical: black men between 25 and 45, driving late, stopped for minor violations that escalated into arrests, sometimes worse. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, not anger, not yet. It was disappointment, heavy and cold. He had sentenced men for less. And now, he was being asked to expose a system he had helped legitimize for decades. At midnight, he sent Agent Hayes a short message. "I'll do it. But on my terms." 3 weeks later, in a discreet basement conference room at the federal courthouse, Daniel met Agent Hayes and her small team. Hayes was in her 40s, sharp eyes, close-cropped hair, the posture of someone who had seen too much to be impressed by anyone. Next to her stood Agent Miguel Torres, a tech specialist who looked more like a college professor than an operative. On the table lay a small black case. Hayes opened it. Inside sat a microtransmitter, no bigger than a coin. "This," she said, "is the key. It'll record everything within a 12-foot radius. Audio only. Secure channel, encrypted. Once activated, it runs for 12 hours straight." Torres added, "We'll monitor you in real time. We'll have eyes on the area from a distance, but you'll be on your own." Daniel nodded, examining the device. "Where do you want me?" Hayes smiled faintly. "On the road. As a citizen." The plan was deceptively simple. Daniel would drive through known stop zones along the interstate, areas with high racial profiling statistics, in an unmarked vehicle registered to a federal shell company. His only task, to remain calm, cooperate fully, and record everything. "We're not after traffic tickets," Hayes explained. "We're after patterns of abuse. We need voices, words, tone. The way they treat you before they know who you are. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And what if things get physical? Hayes didn't flinch. Then we intervene. But only if absolutely necessary. The goal is to let them expose themselves. He looked at her for a long moment. Agent Hayes, if I do this, there's no going back. You understand that? She nodded. Neither can we. Over the next month, Daniel trained quietly with the Bureau's behavioral team. They taught him how to handle high-tension encounters, how to control breathing, how to de-escalate without surrendering dignity. He practiced driving routes, practiced his cover story, practiced the art of staying alive. They called it field conditioning. Daniel called it rehearsing fear. Sometimes, at night, he would stand in front of the mirror and look at himself, the crisp lines of his suit replaced by a hoodie and jeans, the respectable judge hidden beneath the face of an ordinary black man on a dark highway. He wondered if the officers who stopped him would see him as a person, or a threat. Early March. Snow had melted into gray slush. Daniel took the Bureau's silver Ford Taurus onto I-94 just after dusk, transmitter on, heart steady. The highway stretched ahead like an unending river of concrete. He drove past the exit signs, Kalamazoo, Marshall, Jackson, watching the flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers in the distance. Each time he saw them, his pulse quickened. Each time, they turned away. The first 2 nights were uneventful. By the third, he almost began to believe that perhaps things had changed, that maybe the reports were exaggerated, or maybe he was invisible after all. Then, on the 4th night, he heard the siren. 9:43 p.m. Mile marker 216. A single cruiser eased up behind him, lights strobing across the wet asphalt. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He pulled over calmly, turned on the dome light, rolled down the window. 2 figures approached, one male, one female. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with short blonde hair and the kind of smirk that didn't need a reason. His name tag read him, Collins. The woman, Officer Jenna Holt, walked a step behind, eyes cautious, hand resting on her holster. Evening, Collins said. License and registration. Daniel handed them over. Was I speeding, officer? Just routine check, Collins said. He glanced inside the car. You from around here? Passing through, Daniel replied. Collins nodded slowly, eyes scanning the dashboard. Nice car. Bit fancy for this neighborhood. Daniel kept his tone even. It's a rental. Collins muttered. Step out of the vehicle for me. Daniel hesitated. Is there a reason, officer? Collins leaned in. You asking questions now? A silence fell, the kind that lives between dignity and danger. Daniel stepped out. The recorder in his jacket pocket captured everything, the tone, the sarcasm, the sound of boots crunching against gravel. Within minutes, Collins was running his ID, making small talk that wasn't small at all. So, Daniel Reed, huh? What do you do for a living? Law, Daniel said. Law, huh? Must be nice. He laughed, a dry, dismissive laugh. You know, I see guys like you all the time. Think the rules don't apply. Think because you talk nice, you're special. He handed the ID back with a smirk. Watch yourself, counselor. Roads get rough around here. Daniel got back in the car, closed the door, and exhaled slowly. His pulse hammered in his ears. He didn't move for almost a minute. Then, quietly, he whispered into the darkness. They'll believe it now. Back at the Bureau's field office, Agent Hayes listened to the live feed. Every word. Every pause. Every insult. She looked at Torres, who was already marking timestamps on his laptop. This is it, she said. We've got them. But she didn't smile. Because she knew this was just the beginning. A week later, Operation Silent Ground expanded. Daniel's first recording was the proof the Bureau needed to escalate the investigation. federal observers were placed in unmarked cars, monitoring patrol units. Complaints that had been ignored for years suddenly had names, dates, audio. But the deeper they went, the darker it got. Whispers of falsified reports, intimidation, and cover-ups reaching into the department's leadership. And somehow, word began to leak, someone inside was talking. Hayes warned Daniel that his cover might not last. He smiled faintly. Then we'd better finish this before they realize who they've stopped. The wind howled across the open highway like a warning. Dark clouds gathered above Lakeborn County, their edges glowing silver under the moonlight. Judge Daniel Reed adjusted his rearview mirror and checked the small transmitter pinned beneath his coat collar. It was his third operation run in as many weeks, and every time felt heavier than the last. Agent Lauren Hayes' voice came faintly through the earpiece. "Comms check, Daniel. You're live on Channel 1. He responded calmly, "Copy that. Route 78 westbound. Everything looks quiet." "Stay sharp," Hayes said. "Tonight's shift includes Collins and Holt. They're unpredictable." Daniel exhaled, long and slow. "They always are." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the hum of the engine filling the silence between his thoughts. There was something electric in the air, not just the weather, but instinct. He could feel it. Something was about to happen. He'd taken this stretch of I-78 a dozen times before. Truck stops, gas stations, half-lit motels that smelled of stale coffee and rain. But tonight, it felt different. The roads were slick, the lights sparse. Every shadow seemed to move. He passed a sign. "Benton Creek, next exit." In his mind, Daniel replayed Agent Hayes' briefing from earlier that afternoon. "They've been clocking your car for days," she'd said. "They think you're a courier, maybe drugs, maybe cash. We're certain Collins has been tipped off that you're driving through tonight." He had asked her if that meant the Bureau was pulling him out. She shook her head. "Not yet. We need the moment. The real proof. When it happens, we'll be there." Daniel had nodded, understanding what "when it happens" really meant. When the danger is undeniable. 9:17 p.m. Blue and red lights exploded in his mirrors. Daniel's heart thudded once, hard. He eased the car to the shoulder, hands steady. 2 cruisers stopped behind him this time. 2 sets of doors opened. He recognized Officer Collins immediately, same swagger, same smirk. Beside him stood another officer, younger, leaner, eyes flicking nervously, Officer Nate Briggs. Collins approached the driver's side, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Evening," he said, voice dripping with false politeness. "License, registration." Daniel complied, handing them over without a word. Collins looked at the documents, then at Daniel. "Well, look who we got here again. Mr. Law." Daniel said evenly, "Good evening, officer." "Yeah, good evening," Collins repeated, sarcasm curling around the words. He leaned down. "You in a hurry tonight, counselor?" "No, sir." "Mind stepping out again?" Daniel hesitated, remembering the Bureau's instructions. "Stay calm. De-escalate. Do not provoke." He opened the door slowly, stepping out into the freezing wind. Collins circled the car, eyes scanning it like a predator circling prey. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Daniel replied quietly, "Am I being detained, officer?" Collins turned, grin fading. "Excuse me?" "I asked," Daniel repeated, "if I'm being detained." Briggs shifted uncomfortably. "Mark, maybe we should." Collins snapped, "Shut up, rookie." Then he stepped closer to Daniel, so close their breaths mixed in the cold. "You people," he said softly, "always think you can talk your way out of everything." The words hit like a slap. Not shouted, whispered, deliberate. Daniel didn't move. Didn't speak. He just looked at the man in front of him, and in that stillness was something dangerous, dignity. Collins sneered. "Turn around." Hands on the hood. Daniel obeyed, his palms pressing against the cold metal. Behind him, Colin's voice carried over the wind. "Got yourself a fancy ride, huh? What's a guy like you doing in this part of town at night?" Daniel answered, "Driving home." Collins chuckled. "Home? Sure." Briggs stood a few feet away, uneasy, his flashlight trembling slightly. He'd joined the force less than 2 years ago. He wasn't blind, he saw what Collins was doing. But speaking up meant ending your career before it began. He tried, weakly, "Mark, maybe we should just write the ticket." Collins cut him off. "We're running him for warrants." He radioed something inaudible, then leaned in again. "You been drinking, Mr. Reed?" "No." "Drugs?" "No." Collins tapped the trunk of the car. "We'll see about that." He turned to Briggs. "Search the vehicle." Briggs hesitated. "We don't have probable." "Do it." Briggs swallowed hard, then started toward the passenger side. Inside Daniel's coat, the microtransmitter hummed quietly, every word, every unlawful command, captured and streaming directly to the FBI surveillance van parked 3 miles away. Agent Hayes gripped her headset, whispering to Torres. "They're crossing the line. Stay ready." Collins patted down Daniel roughly, his movements taunting. "You nervous, counselor?" Daniel replied softly, "No." "Are you?" The officer froze for half a second, then shoved him harder against the car. "You think this is funny?" "I think," Daniel said, "it's unconstitutional." That did it. Collins pulled back, his jaw tightening. "Say that again." Daniel didn't. He just stared ahead, expression calm. Collins pulled out his taser, just enough to make the threat visible. "You want to play smart, we can play smart." The tension snapped. From the earpiece, Hayes' voice erupted. "Go! Go now!" Before Collins could react, 2 unmarked SUVs screeched to a halt behind the cruisers. Federal agents poured out, badges flashing, weapons holstered but visible. "FBI! Step away from the vehicle!" Collins spun around, shock flooding his face. "What the hell is this?" Hayes strode forward, voice sharp and controlled. "Put the taser down, Officer Collins. You're under federal investigation." Briggs froze. Collins' hand twitched. "On the ground," Hayes ordered. "Now." Collins glared at her. "Investigation? For what?" "For civil rights violations," she said. "For abuse of authority. For targeting civilians based on race. For obstructing justice." She stepped closer. "And for threatening a sitting federal judge." Collins blinked, confusion flickering. "What?" Hayes nodded toward Daniel, who turned slowly to face them. For the first time that night, Collins' voice cracked. "You're a judge?" Daniel looked him in the eye. "Federal District Court, Southern Division." The color drained from Collins' face. Briggs dropped his flashlight. Hayes didn't wait. "Agent Torres, secure the devices. Get the dash cams. Everything." Torres moved fast, collecting evidence while another agent read Collins' rights. "You have the right to remain silent." But Collins wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on Daniel, disbelief, rage, humiliation colliding in his expression. "You set me up," he hissed. Daniel's voice was quiet, steady. "No. You set yourself up." Within hours, the incident hit internal bureau servers like wildfire. Audio, video, transcripts, everything laid bare. By dawn, Operation Silent Ground went public. The Attorney General ordered immediate suspension of the Lake Bourne County Sheriff's Department. Press trucks swarmed the courthouse steps by noon. Daniel stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't speak to reporters. He didn't smile for cameras. He simply walked through the corridors of justice he had served for decades, corridors that suddenly felt narrower, colder, but somehow cleaner. Agent Hayes met him in his chambers later that day. She handed him a file, thicker than before, filled with testimonies and internal memos. "They're going to call this the Reed case," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I'd prefer they call it the beginning." That night, Daniel sat alone in his car again, the same seat, the same highway stretching out before him. But now, the silence felt different. He thought of Collins, of Briggs, of every man he had sentenced over the years who swore the system was rigged. He used to think justice was about laws and verdicts. Now he understood, it was about exposure. The truth, once recorded, couldn't be unseen. He whispered to himself, "Maybe now, the law can finally see." The following weeks were chaos. News anchors debated his name every night. Some called him a hero. Others said he'd overstepped. But the evidence spoke louder than opinion. Dozens of officers were indicted across the state. Civil rights groups demanded national oversight. Congress drafted emergency reform under the name the Reed Act, establishing federal review boards for police misconduct. For the first time in decades, the system began to look inward. And yet, amid the celebration, Daniel felt none of it. He was proud, yes, but pride was a thin shield against exhaustion. He knew the war wasn't over. Only one battle had been won. One morning, as he prepared to leave for court, Daniel found an envelope taped to his front door. No name. Just 2 words written in neat handwriting. "Thank you." Inside was a photo, a young black man in a graduation gown, smiling at the camera. On the back, a note. "He made it home that night because of you." Daniel stood there for a long time, sunlight washing over the porch. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe, deeply, freely. The storm had passed, but the echoes remained. Weeks turned into months. Courtrooms overflowed with reporters, lawyers, and whispers. America had found a new symbol, not of power, but of conscience. And Daniel Reed never wanted any of it. It began in the Federal District Court of Grand Rapids, the same place where Daniel had presided for nearly 2 decades. But this time, he wasn't sitting on the bench. He was sitting behind the witness stand. Opposite him sat Mark Collins, his face drawn, the arrogance replaced by exhaustion. Beside him, Officer Nate Briggs, younger, paler, looking more like a scared student than a cop. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Camera crews weren't allowed inside, but the nation watched through sketches, headlines, and leaked transcripts. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Alicia Carter, stood before the jury. She spoke with calm precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a case about one bad officer. This is about a system that looked the other way, until someone made them look again." She gestured toward Daniel. "That someone is Judge Daniel Reed." When Daniel took the stand, he didn't bring theatrics. He spoke simply, like a man recounting something inevitable. He described the stops, the words, the tone. He explained how the Bureau had planned the sting, how the recordings were authenticated, how they revealed not isolated incidents but a pattern of bias rooted in culture. The defense tried to rattle him. They called it entrapment. They said he provoked it. They said he wanted to be stopped. Daniel listened patiently, then replied, "If recording discrimination is entrapment, then so is shining a light in a dark room." The jury sat silent. Even the defense attorney lowered his gaze for a moment. After 3 weeks, the verdict came swift and heavy. Officer Mark Collins, guilty on all counts, civil rights violations, falsifying reports, and aggravated assault under color of law. He was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Officer Nate Briggs pleaded guilty to misconduct and obstruction of justice. Because he cooperated and testified, he received 18 months and a lifetime ban from law enforcement. When the judge, a colleague of Daniel's, read the sentence, the courtroom was utterly still. Then, from the back row, a single voice broke through. A man whispered, "It's about time." No one argued. The fallout was immediate. The Lake Bourne County Police Department underwent a full federal audit. Dozens of officers resigned. Several commanders were dismissed. National networks aired documentaries. Operation Silent Ground, How one judge exposed America's blind spot. Protesters marched, not in anger, but in solidarity. The Reed Act passed with bipartisan support. For the first time, a federal framework was established to review racial bias in policing, real oversight, with civilian voices included. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. And for Daniel, that was enough. Months later, Daniel returned to his bench. The first case he presided over was a quiet one, a dispute between neighbors about a property line. Nothing dramatic. No cameras. No headlines. But as he looked around the courtroom, at the officers present, at the young attorneys, at the citizens watching, he felt something shift. For once, he didn't see fear in their faces. He saw attention. Respect. Possibility. When he delivered the verdict, he did so gently, reminding both parties of their shared responsibility as neighbors. It wasn't about being right. It was about being fair. One evening, Agent Lauren Hayes came to visit. She found Daniel in his office, surrounded by old case files and the familiar smell of coffee. She smiled. "Still working late, Judge?" He chuckled. "Habit." They sat for a while, silence stretching comfortably between them. Hayes finally said, "You changed more than you realize." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't change anything. I just proved what we already knew." "Maybe," she said. "But you proved it loudly." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out the tiny black transmitter, the same one that started it all. He placed it on the desk. "It's strange," he said. "This little thing caught more truth than I did in 20 years on the bench." Hayes looked at him. "So what will you do now?" Daniel leaned back, eyes distant. "Teach," he said. "Maybe help the next generation believe in something better." A year later, Daniel Reed stood at a podium inside the Midwest Police Academy. Rows of new cadets sat before him, young men and women, wide-eyed, uncertain. Some black, some white, all wearing the same uniform. He began quietly. "When I was your age, I thought justice was about rules. About who was right and who was wrong." He paused. "But I learned that justice isn't a set of laws, it's a choice. Every time you pull someone over, every time you raise your voice, every time you decide whether to see a person or a suspect, that's justice." He scanned the room. The cadets were listening, completely still. The uniform doesn't make you right. The badge doesn't make you just. What makes you just is remembering that the law is supposed to protect, not to punish. A hush fell. Then, slowly, Daniel smiled. "The world won't remember my name. But maybe, someday, they'll remember what we tried to do here." The room broke into quiet applause, not loud, not theatrical, but real. Later that night, Daniel drove home through the same stretch of highway where it had all begun. The road was empty, moonlight reflecting off the asphalt. He slowed near mile marker 216, the place where his life had changed forever. The ghosts of that night still lingered, the flashing lights, the cold air, the voice that said, "You people." But now, there was peace. A small roadside sign had been placed there by local citizens. It read, "In honor of justice." Here, a man chose truth over silence. Daniel pulled over and got out. He stood in the quiet, feeling the wind brush against his coat. For a moment, he closed his eyes and listened, not for sirens, not for fear, but for stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when something broken has finally begun to heal. He whispered, barely audible, "Evelyn, we did it." Then he smiled, a small, tired, satisfied smile, and walked back to his car. As he drove off, the sign disappeared into the darkness behind him, but its message remained, carried on the wind, across highways, towns, and hearts that needed to believe again. Because sometimes, one man's courage is enough to remind a nation that justice still has a voice. 6 months later, a journalist wrote, "He wasn't the first to see injustice. He was just the first to record it and refuse to look away." The article was titled, "The Man Who Made America Listen." And beneath it, in small italics, "Inspired by a true event."